everyone, welcome to the paint party. My name is Laura and I am your guide for today's painting, which is an adorable little stuffed bear named Bennington, and he's really hoping that you will be his Bearentine this February. So if you're painting along today, take a look at the description down below for the supplies you'll need, pull up an easel, and let's get painting. So we're going to begin with our background, and if you take a close look at that background, there's a little bit of a subtle texture. We're not going to do long, smooth brush strokes. We're going to make some short, little crisscross strokes with our 3/4 inch flat brush, and I have some titanium white and bright red acrylic paint. So first things first, I want to make sure my brush is just a little wet. I like to give it a little dip in the water and then wipe off some of that excess. Make sure you have your paper towels on hand so you could dab off anything that might be dripping. And I'm going to pull a little bit of white paint and a little bit of red paint, not really caring what the ratio is necessarily. And I'm going to make my little pink, but it's not thoroughly mixed. And I'm going to make some little crisscrosses on my canvas. Okay. Now as you work, you can alternate between picking up just some red if you want to darken any area, or maybe just some white if you want to lighten that up a bit. We're going in this sort of crisscross pattern to give a nice little texture. Now keep in mind, when you're painting, the more you brush over an area, the more it's going to smooth out. But if you want to keep that texture, you just want to add a little brush stroke and then move on. So we're going to go ahead and fill in our entire canvas here with our pink paint so we have a nice base coat for our little Benny the Bear. So while you're doing the background here, keep in mind that a great way to keep that paint nice and fluid so that it moves across the canvas more easily is to keep your brush moist. You want it wet, but not dripping wet. So periodically take that brush, give it a little dip and dab, a little dip in the water, a little dab on your paper towel. Keep those bristles nice and moist so you can really spread out that paint, get more use out of it. And also keep in mind, this is the background, so a large portion of the center section will be covered up. So when you get into that center area, perhaps you don't need to be quite so precise. You still want to cover up the whole background so you have plenty of wiggle room. You know, maybe you decide you want to make your bear bigger or smaller. You have that wiggle room if the entire background is covered. But you don't have to be quite so precise with it. It's all right if it's a little, sketchy looking, or there's like a little hint of canvas poking through here and there. So go ahead, get those backgrounds filled in. That's our first step. Not really minding whether you have a super light pink or a dark pink. Having a little bit of variation in this background is going to help add to that texture. If you want to kind of smooth out any of those brush strokes, you want to go with a very, very light sort of pressure, longer brush strokes, nice and smooth if you want to kind of smooth out any parts. But if you really like that textured look, you can just go all over, really press down and just make short little quick brush strokes. So that's really up to you, right? Everyone's got their own sort of style when it comes to painting. There's no one right way or wrong way to do this. And remember, the main goal here is really just to have a lot of fun. Just explore your creativity, have fun, see what happens. It may look a little different than you anticipated, but that's part of the fun of it. Okay, so as I pick up more paint, I'm just mixing different ratios of that red and white. Sometimes I pick up just red, sometimes just white, sometimes a little of each. Not really mixing them together thoroughly on my palette and letting that happen on my canvas. And as I'm filling this in, you can see I'm just doing all sort of random crisscross brush strokes. There's some texture going on. I have varying shades of pink throughout. Some spots it's darker, some it's lighter. And if you compare it to the original, you'll see some differences, but that's the fun of it. I could do the same painting 50 times and have 50 different paintings, or we could have 50 different people paint the same painting, and again, it's going to be 50 different paintings. They're all going to look a little bit different. And that's the cool thing about art. Alright, so I need a little more white paint here in my palette. I ended up going through that kind of quickly. But it is good to keep in mind, try not to take too much paint when you first start. Take a little bit as needed as you go, because sometimes you may surprise yourself. You may not need quite as much paint as you thought you did. And then it's always a bummer at the end of the session when you have your palette still so full of paint and you know you're just not going to use it. So I'm curious if anyone out there is new to painting, can leave a comment down below, or maybe you've painted before, maybe just a few times, maybe you've painted a million times, I don't know. But let me know in the comments if you've done anything like this before, or if you're new to the whole experience. So if you find that that brush is sort of just, scratching that canvas and you're really not getting good coverage, sometimes you want to just start by getting your brush a little bit wet. Remember that little dip in the water, dab on your paper towel so it doesn't drip. Sometimes you just need a little extra moisture to help that paint along, and then other times you just need to get a nice big healthy scoop of paint if that little bit of water didn't really help. Try first just wetting your brush a little bit. Sometimes that's all you need, right? And if your canvas is propped up on an easel and the bottom of the canvas is getting blocked by this easel here, if that feels like it's sort of in the way and it's kind of awkward, just flip your canvas around, make the bottom the top so that it's easier for you to access that edge there. Nice little tip to sort of keep in mind all the time while you're painting. If you ever find that it's kind of awkward to reach a certain part of that canvas, just flip it around, hold it, maybe take it off the easel, maybe hold it flat, or, put it on a flat surface. Whatever you need to do. So this painting here we're doing is a cute little teddy bear. Although I like to do a lot of landscapes, so you'll probably see a lot of landscapes on this channel with the occasional cute little animal, maybe a bird. I like birds. Birds and insects, I like painting those. I like to do a lot of landscapes. If anyone has any ideas for paintings that they want to see, let me know down in the comments. I don't really do humans, though. I don't really do I do portraits, bears, dogs, cats, but not portraits. I don't do humans. So anything else is up for grabs. If you got an idea, let me know. You can always check out my Instagram page @tinyartwork. I have the link in the description. You can see examples of some of my paintings. Perhaps you want me to do a larger version of it, maybe a larger simplified version. I could break that down for you and do that on the channel here. Alright, almost done with this background. Alright, sometimes you also have to really kind of press down with that brush. I know before I said go nice and light, gentle pressure, but it depends on what you're going for too. If you really just want to get that paint in there, you might want to press down more to really work it into the canvas, but then to smooth it out, you want to go with nice, gentle, light pressure and nice, long, smooth strokes. There we go. There's our background. That is just a general idea. Everyone's going to look a little bit different. But we have this nice, subtle texture. Maybe some is a little more subtle than others. Or maybe you have a really crazy textured background. But once that's all filled in, you want to just let that be. I know, I'm saying let it be while I'm still adding brush strokes. It's hard to walk away sometimes, but sometimes you gotta know when to walk away and just let it be and then move on to the next step, which probably good life advice too, just in general, right? So I'm going to make myself stop here. I'm going to rinse off my brush. Anytime you're not going to use your brush for a while, you definitely want to rinse it off. Acrylic paint dries fairly quickly. So if you leave a brush with acrylic paint on it sitting out for too long, it's just going to get dried and crusty. So really try to get into the habit of rinsing off that brush when you're not going to use it. We're going to let this background hang out and dry for a little bit. So if you need to, finish up the background or hit pause on the video, and when that background is nice and dry, we can come back and we can sketch out our little bear. Alright, so my background is nice and dry. If you're a little unsure if yours is dry or not, take a look at that canvas in the light, maybe pick it up and move it around. If you see big shiny spots, that means it needs a little more time to dry, but if it's got a matte finish, you can touch it, you can rub it, you can paint over it, and you are good to go. So before we commit to adding paint to our canvas, I'm going to use this piece of white chalk here to roughly sketch out where Benny the Bear is going to be situated on this canvas. Because if you're writing with chalk on the canvas and you're like, uh-oh, that line isn't in the right spot, you can take a dry paper towel and you can just rub it off. If it still leaves a little bit of a residual mark, that's okay. The paint's going to cover it up, and when the painting's completely dry, you can always go over it again. So think geometric shapes when you do Benny the Bear. Anytime you want to draw something, you want to break it down into simple shapes. So looking at the head, he's got a flat top and it comes out on the side, right? Sort of like the top half of his head is a trapezoid. So I'm just going to find the approximate middle here, come down a few inches from the top. So I base my canvas here so it's a little easier. So I'm just going to sketch out the top of the head. I have my chalk here. And his head's going to slope down on either side. He's got these nice, big, cute cheeks right here. So that's sort of sloping down a little bit. And then we want to angle the bottom part of his face in. Alright, so let's adjust this a little bit. He's got these cute little ears. I think nice little, kind of like semicircles, but they're kind of a little more like if you go to continue, you're going to have these little triangular shapes. Go over your lines again if something's not quite angled the way you would like it to be. So we want to do his arms now. So his arms come out, it looks like they kind of come out from the top of his head on either side of his little chin there. So the arm here on the right, his right, your left if you're facing, it's going to just kind of curve towards the left and then down towards the right. Okay. And the inner part of the arm, it's going to come diagonal down and curve back towards that first line. And then his other arm is covered up by that card, so you just have to make a short little curved line. You can draw the card in there. That's fairly simple, right? Triangular shape here. It's alright if it kind of goes off the page. Every time I do this, I get the proportions just a little bit different, but again, that's sort of the fun of art. Alright, he's got a nice little paw here, so I think nice curve, like a nice little semicircle. Go like you're going to make a nice little circle, but then it gets cut off for the bottom. And then that angles back towards that paw that we did there, his little arm. I'm really pressing down with the chalk here so it shows up on camera, but you can be as light to the touch of that chalk as you want, so you can go over your lines multiple times if needed. And he's got another little foot right here peeking out behind that little card. You always fine-tune it more once we get that paint on there. And if you want to, while you're doing this, you can also sketch out where his eyes are going to be, which are more in the center line of his head. So you could just do 2 little circles. And he's got that cute little like triangle nose. But that's inside a smooth part, right? He's got all this fur on the outer part of his face, and then inside this like kind of oval shape, which goes a little down towards the bottom. That part's more smooth. All right, so go ahead, take your time, get that sketched in. Remember, this is just a guideline. When we paint over it, it's going to be a little more fine-tuned. We just need a nice little sketch to be our guide. So go ahead, do that, and then we will work on adding the paint. So once this is all sketched in, we're going to move to our bear colors. So for the bear, we need more white, of course. You always need white paint on hand, pretty much no matter what you're painting. And then we have 2 different shades of brown. We have a burnt sienna and a burnt umber. So the burnt umber is just going to be a little bit darker than the burnt sienna, which is a little bit of a reddish brown. The burnt sienna will be the main brown color. And I would save the burnt umber for more the areas where you want to add a little bit of a shadow. And we also need a little bit of yellow, and I'm using a yellow oxide here, which is basically the same as a yellow ochre or a raw sienna. So if you can't find yellow oxide, you can look for one of those other colors. And I'm going to use my round brush. I have 2 round brushes. I have my 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch round brush. So I'm going to use my 1/4 inch round brush here. We're going to fill in our bear. He's got very, very fluffy fur. It's very textured, right? It's not smooth. So we're going to make short little brush strokes. You can make them longer if you want him to have longer fur, but just short little brush strokes. And we're really just going to alternate between the different shades of brown as we go, so that it doesn't really blend in too much. So I'm going to start by picking up a little bit of this little white, maybe a little bit of burnt sienna. That's the lighter of the 2 browns on my brush here. And I'm going to start by making short little brush strokes. Now, when you do a painting, you want to make sure that you're following the contours of whatever it is you're painting. You don't necessarily want to go straight left, right, or straight up, down. You want to follow the contours. Okay? So as I do the face, I go from the nose up towards the top of the head, and then as I go out, I'm going to follow that curve out to the sides, right? Following that contour. So I'm just leaving some space where I sketched out where the face is going to be. Take my round brush and just trace around those circles for the eyes, just to make them a little more defined. If you want to do that, if that helps you, you can do that. And same for around this part of the face here where the nose and the mouth are. You can just kind of trace along there. Again, it's going to be fine-tuned a little bit more, just so you know not to paint any brush strokes inside there just yet. So again, I have my round brush, the bigger of the 2 round brushes, my 1/4 inch round, picking up a little white, a little burnt sienna. I'm not mixing them thoroughly. You can see on the brush, it's not really mixed. And when I make a short little brush stroke, you see a little bit of both the white and the brown. And I'm following those contours. I'm going from the center out, from the center out, center out, center out, in short little brush strokes. And as we fill in and we go to pick up some more paint, you can pick up a little more of either that burnt sienna or the white, or even the burnt umber if you want to make an area a little more shadowy. So for example, right in here where the face is maybe a little bit in shadow, maybe I want to get a little more burnt umber in there, get a few brush strokes in there between the eye on the top of that mouth area. Maybe I want some more highlights on the cheek, so I'm going to add a few extra strokes of white there. So you're really just alternating between your two browns and your white as you fill in these short little brush strokes, making sure not to overwork that paint so that we can still see the texture. You want to see those individual brush strokes. Don't worry about the yellow just yet. We're going to use that for the insides of the ears. We're going to use that for this little mouth area, the belly, and the bottoms of the paws. So if you look at these brush strokes, you'll see they go in the direction of the face. I'm not just going straight across or straight up down. I'm starting from the center line and moving up towards the top. As I go around, I'm following that curve out to the sides. Follow those contours. Sometimes I pick up a little more white, sometimes I pick up a little more burnt sienna, sometimes I pick up a little bit of that burnt umber. And as you fill in, you'll have varying shades of brown and some shadows and some highlights. And that's what's going to make this really pop. And don't worry about those chalk lines, you can paint right over them. And there's really no need to clean your brush in between colors here because we're just alternating between those colors. But if you feel like there's just too much paint on that brush after a while, it's just like all gunked up on there, you may need to give your brush a quick little rinse, or maybe you just need to do a quick little dip in there just to keep things nice and fluid. Just don't forget to dab on that paper towel if you do dip your brush in the water. That helps prevent that water from just dripping down the canvas. My bear looks kind of funny right now, right? Because there's still little bits of canvas peeking through on the face. We didn't fill in the eyes or the nose or the mouth yet. I'm just going to move on to other sections just so we can get a sense of this bear here, right? Follow that curve of this arm here, his arm. It curves it around. It's like this sort of like a cylinder. Think cylinder. Follow that curve. I'm not just going straight across. I'm kind of curving. Following like a little bit of a curve here. Sometimes I pick up a little more burnt sienna, sometimes a little more white. You want to think where the shadow is going to be. So anytime something is going to be a little bit behind something, right, there's going to be a little shadow there. And this little crease here, maybe there's a little shadow, so that's where you want to pick up a little more of that burnt umber. That's the darker brown. Maybe you want to do a few extra strokes in white towards the center where the light might hit it. So if you ever want to really customize this and make your own little portrait, you can always maybe, take out your old favorite childhood stuffed animal, or maybe you have a kid in the family with a favorite teddy bear. You use this as like sort of your practice guide, and then paint your kid's favorite little teddy bear. Short little brush strokes, following those contours. Try not to overwork an area. The more you brush over the same area, the more that paint's just gonna blend together. Follow that contour again. Remember, think cylindrical, so it's gonna go like around the arm. And these brush strokes are curved, they're not straight. I'm gonna curve those lines a little bit. Follow that contour. Go right up to the belly, right up to this line for the card. You need to get a little darker, a little more of a shadow, like under the face or in this little crease here, or behind the card. That's where you want to get that darker brown. So all these colors are going throughout, both shades of brown and the white. you're going to have throughout the bear. But in the areas where you want a little more of a highlight, that's where you do a little extra white. Areas where you want more of a shadow, you do a little extra of the burnt umber. But you still have the light colors in the shadowy areas and the dark colors in the lighter areas. So you need that contrast. All right, so he's starting to shape up a bit. Definitely needs some more filling in, but we'll continue on with the feet. And if at any point in time you're like, oh my God, Laura, you gotta slow down, you're going too fast. Remember, you can always pause this video and then pick up where you need to. So there's no pressure at all to work at the exact same pace that I'm working at. And in fact, when I do my own personal paintings, just for me, not for any of these paint parties, I take my sweet time, trust me. So if you need to take your sweet time, go ahead, pause the video all you want, come back to it. Alright, so for the feet, Benny's got fur coming down over his paw, but the bottom part is more flat and it's got that yellow oxide color to it. So I'm just going to make this little curve here. I have my burnt sienna and white on my brush. I'm just using the tip of that round brush. I'm going to hold my brush like a pencil here and steady my hand on the canvas. I'm just going to make a nice curved line from what would be the toe, I guess. And then make a nice little curved line that kind of comes up and then meets the heel. I'm going to do that on the other side as well. It's not to be exact, you can always fine tune. There we go. So when I fill in the feet, I'm going to leave that space underneath the curve empty for now. We're going to fill that in with another color and make much smoother brush strokes there. Making sure to do extra of that darker brown where it's shadowy, like the part of the bottom paw that's underneath the little like hand paw, right? We have the hand paws and the feet paws. And even if you have a darker area, you still want to get a little bit of white in there. Can't have light without the dark. Okay, so leaving space here for the card. Gotta move down here. Sometimes you gotta do that. Sometimes you need to adjust. Okay. So that's pretty much filled in, but if you look closely, you'll see like little bits of pink poking through. But that's all right because I'm just gonna go back now and fill it in a little bit better. I know I didn't do the ears just yet. I'll get to that. I'm gonna use my smaller round brush for that. But at this point, once it's like pretty much filled in with the brown areas, you just want to go back and just fine tune. You can adjust the angle of your brush strokes if you need to, right? Or maybe if like one arm is too skinny, for example, you can extend it out a little more. And you can just add in little extra brush strokes wherever you have a few little, gaps. Or if one area looks particularly flat and maybe you need a highlight, you want to add a little extra pop of white there. Or maybe another area needs a little more shadow, so you want to get a little more of that burnt umber and get a few darker brush strokes where the shadow would be. So at this point, let's take our time, let's fill in all those little gaps, fine tune the shape of the bear. Remember, we want to leave space for the eyes and this little mouth area where his nose will be. We're leaving space for the belly and the card, the bottoms of the feet and the ears. We didn't get to the ears yet. So we're going to leave space for that and fill in the rest. Keep filling that in. Take your time. Pause the video if you need to. Go at your own pace. The more you fill it in, the more it's going to look like you have a little stuffed bear to play with. You gotta trust the process. And have fun with it. See where those brush strokes take you. Sometimes things come out a little bit differently than you anticipated. If you just kind of go with the flow, that happy accident, as Bob Ross would call it, will inform your next brush stroke. And it can just take you on a whole little journey. And again, don't worry about that chalk if you still see a bit of a chalk outline after you get that bear painted and you're done with that area, but you see the chalk, just leave it be for now. Once you are 100% certain this painting has had plenty of time to dry, you can just wipe it off. But while you're still working on it, just leave it be, just in case some spot is still wet, because you don't want to end up accidentally smudging your little bear here. Got more white there than I intended, but that's alright. Just gonna go back in with my brown. Go over it. Get a little more burnt umber in there. Alright, so I think his head is shaping up alright. Move on to his arm, and you can see if you look close, if you compare the head to the arm where I didn't quite fill in as much yet, you can see the difference. You can see how adding more and more of these brush strokes in different shades really helps to fill it in. So this little paw here, what I would call the hand paw, for lack of a better term, is on top of his little foot paw. So I want to make sure I have a little highlight there on this paw so that we're sure that that's the one, that's the object that's in front. I always want to add a little highlight to the object that's in front and a little extra shadow, so in this case the burnt umber, to the object that's behind. So if you are painting along today, I would love to see your work. If you want to take a photo of it, maybe pop it up on your Instagram page. You could tag @tinyartwork. There's an underscore between tiny and art. That's down in the description below. You'll find that link there. Hashtag Laura Rose Paints. Alright, so I could probably fine tune that a little bit more, but here you see you have the general idea here. I did a lot of short little brush strokes with my 3/4 inch round brush, alternating between the burnt sienna, the burnt umber, and white to create this textured look. We didn't want to overwork any of that paint, but we just wanted to keep filling in and filling in, adding more brush strokes and more texture. So keep working on that if you need to. If you just want to take a little break because that was a lot of work for you, go ahead. Just make sure you rinse off that brush. You can pause the video if you need to, but I'm going to move on next with the eyes, this little mouth area, the ears, we got the belly, we got the card, we got the bottoms of the feet. This bear is gonna look super, super cute for Valentine's Day, or as he likes to call it, Bearentine's Day. Okay, so once you've pretty much finished filling in all that brown fur, with the exception of the tops of the ears, which we'll get to later, you can switch gears and go for some of that yellow oxide color. If you can't find yellow oxide, perhaps it's labeled yellow ochre, or you could also look for raw sienna. It's a very similar color, very warm yellow. So I'm going to use that as my primary color for the belly, this part of the face here, the bottoms of the paws, and the insides of the ears. So we'll need some of that. We'll also need white, and then keep those browns on hand because you may need a little bit of that for some shadows. So I'm just going to take my round brush, that 1/4 inch round brush, wipe that off, rinse it, wipe it, and we're going to go for a little bit of that yellow oxide. Okay, so I have some of that here, and I'm just going to kind of dab that canvas. Instead of making those short little brush strokes, I want a somewhat different texture for the belly. So I'm just going to dab that canvas, dab, dab, dab. I'm like just tapping that canvas with the tip of that brush. And I'm going to get some of that yellow in there, pick up a little bit of that white on my dirty brush. I'm going to dab, dab, dab a little bit of that white in there. I'm just going to alternate between those two colors, and maybe once in a while pick up a little bit of that burnt umber, or perhaps the burnt sienna, whichever you prefer, and get a little bit of a shadow underneath the chin here, or maybe just behind where his arms are, behind the car. That's where it's going to be a little bit shadowy. So you could tap in just a little bit of that brown in there. You still want it mostly yellow, mostly that yellow oxide or yellow ochre. We're just tapping that in there and alternating between those colors. And everyone's going to have a somewhat different style for tapping on those brush strokes. Everyone's going to have somewhat different looking fur, which is pretty cool. And I'm really excited to see all of your versions of this painting. So just tap, 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 tap. Maybe it helps if you say tap, tap, tap as you go. I don't know. Just have fun with it. That's the important thing. Have fun with it. And as you fill in, you may see that there are like little gaps in between that section and maybe another section. You can always go back and fine tune. So for example, here I'm bringing the belly up to just under this little chin area, and I'm seeing, as I'm doing that, I'm noticing more gaps here where the fur on the face is. So I may want to go back and kind of fine tune that, fill that in a little more. So I'm just going to wipe off my brush, go back for my burnt sienna, go back to the little hairs on the face here. So you can always go back and make adjustments. You can always fine tune your work. And I want that fur on the face to overlap that belly. His chin kind of goes over his little chest there. Pull some of those extra brush strokes down over that belly. So the key for this painting really is texture. You want to see those brush strokes. I'm adding in little brush strokes and moving on. I'm not overworking any area. So I could still see some of those individual brush strokes. It's going to add some texture, make it look fluffy. And if any area is not quite filled in, you can always go back, fill it in a little bit more like I just did right here. And back to the belly. Belly/chest. It's all one big area here. And this is my line for the card, so I'm going to go up to that line, but perhaps I want a little bit of a shadow there. Tap in a little hint of that burnt sienna in that area. It's still going to be mostly that yellow oxide color or yellow ochre, but want a little bit of a shadow in there. And don't forget, if you're going to have shadow, then you need highlights. So don't forget to periodically also pick up a little bit of white. Tap some of that in there, though the lighter color is going to be more towards the center, farther away from the parts of the body that are being covered up or blocked by other items. So if you look closely here, you can see perhaps there's like a tiny little gap between this arm and the belly here. So I could fill in that little gap with a little bit of the color for the belly. If I want to decide, okay, the belly's going to go there, I'm just going to tap in right up to that edge. Or you could decide the opposite and extend those little hairs from the arm on top of the belly. So all that fine-tuning detail, that's really up to you. You've got to decide, do I want this part here to be filled in with the belly? Is that what makes more sense on my painting? Or do I want that arm really like overlapping, and do I want those extra brush strokes to go on top? So I'm just going to fill it in with that yellow here. I'm just going to tap that in. I've decided that's still part of the belly. And every once in a while you're doing this, take a step back. Look at your work from a different perspective. It's really good to just take it as a whole. Sometimes you get caught up in one little detail and you're just like obsessed over it. And I know it's hard to kind of move on sometimes, but every once in a while you need to just reset your brain, put your brush down, take a look at it from a different angle, take it in as a whole, and that really will help you to decide, you know what? I do need just a tiny bit more color here, or I'm ready for the next step. I'm just going to rinse my brush real quick. I'm just going to go back and fine tune those edges here. If you fill in an area and then you still see those little gaps for the background, just go in and just decide what part of the bear is missing from that little space. And just tap in those little brush strokes that you need to fill in that area. So another thing to keep in mind while you're painting, this is just a general painting tip, but perhaps you've already made this observation as you filled in your brush strokes. If you have more paint on your brush and really press down firmly, you'll have a much thicker, bolder brush stroke. If you just go with a little bit and just very, very light pressure and just sort of graze that canvas, you'll just have a nice thin little line. So if you just want like a tiny little hint of a highlight, perhaps just very, very lightly hit that canvas, barely pressing down. But then if there are other areas you want to fill in more quickly, maybe you want to really press down, really get in there, make some bolder brush strokes. Okay, so I think here his face looks a little bit flat compared to the arm. Like it looks more like they're on the same plane, but the face is going to be in front. So I want to add a few more little brush strokes in my white, just very lightly. Add some more highlights down here on this bottom part. If that's too white, I could go back for my burnt sienna. Just to make it kind of pop a little more. This is one of those paintings where I keep going back and forth. You know, I think I have one section done and then I go back to it. I realize I want to fill it in a little more, add some more contrast, add some more texture. You can always keep working on this. Even after the video is done, keep working on it. All right, so I got the belly pretty much filled in. So now I want to use this yellow oxide for the bottoms of the paws. So his little feet here. So I'm going to get a little bit of that yellow on my brush. I'm going to pick up a little bit of white. And we're not necessarily looking for an exact shade. Whatever you like is fine. If you want it to be really pale though, I would say start with the white and then gradually add the yellow color because that one's darker. So you want to gradually add the lighter color if you want something that's really pale. So I have my mix of my yellow and my white, and I'm just going to fill in the bottoms of these paws here. So I have that bit of a guideline from the chalk. I'm just going to trace along that bottom there. And I'm holding my brush like a pencil by that metal part that connects the handle to the bristle. And I can steady my hand on the canvas because this part of the canvas, this is dry, so I can steady my hand on the canvas if I need to. I'll give you a little more control over that brush. Go nice, long, smooth brush strokes and fill it in. So now we're going for something smooth. So I've got long, continuous brush strokes. Okay. I'm going to do the same on the other side. Long, smooth, continuous brush strokes. Fill in that whole area. And if it looks like that brush stroke that you just did kind of cut off that little floofy part of the fur, which is of course the technical term, rinse off your brush and then go back to that burnt sienna color and just tap in little brush strokes that extend over that yellow part of the foot. If the yellow part is still a little wet, give it a minute, let it dry, but you can always go back then and just add in those little brush strokes so that that fur doesn't look like it's just suddenly like cut off. You maybe want to get some that are kind of coming out on the bottom, a few little hairs that kind of just stick out in a different direction every once in a while. Give it some character. Sometimes you need a little bit of white just to kind of get things going. Give it a little more of a body to that paint. So obviously it is for some highlights, but sometimes you need to add a little bit as you go just to kind of get better coverage. Sometimes the paint comes out sort of thin, a little see-through, and you know, it's not giving you the coverage that you necessarily are going for. Alright, so if you look here versus here, you can see I extended some of that fur just by adding a few extra little brush strokes along the bottom of his paw to overlap the bottom part of the foot, whereas here the fur is kind of cut off. So you can go back, if you don't like that sort of cut off look, you can go back. I would say wait till that yellow part is dry, which shouldn't take too long if you're not painting too heavy with that paint. Then you can go back and just tap in little extra brush strokes there. And just have them extend over the bottom part of that paw. Get a little burnt umber, fill in that shadowy area a little bit better. And I'm not cleaning my brush in between my shades of brown or my white, because these colors are going to mingle a little bit on the canvas. It's going to help give me all varying shades of brown, which is what we're going for. Alright, so we got the bottoms of the feet, we got the belly. Let's go for the ears. Alright, so now I'm rinsing my brush because I'm going to go back to using the yellow oxide as my primary color. We want to paint the inside parts of the ears with that light yellow color to match the bottoms of the paws. And if it doesn't match 100%, that's okay, because now we're on a different body part. So we're going to fill that in. We're going to use smooth brush strokes, and then we'll go back and we'll tap in little bits of fur around the top parts of the ears. So I'm starting with my white, adding just a tiny little drop of that yellow oxide, so I have a fairly light color. And I'm just going to fill in those ears. Okay. And this is an opportunity too for you to kind of adjust those ears if you need to. If you made them, you know, one a little smaller than the other, or they're a little lopsided, maybe you want to leave it because maybe it gives your bear a little more character, but maybe you want to also adjust it a little bit. So you certainly can do that. Add some smooth brush strokes here. Still using that round 1/4 inch brush. And again, here I cut off a little bit of the fur just on the top of the head. So I'm just going to leave it, let this dry. I'm going to go back and I'll tap in little extra brush strokes so that it overlaps the insides of the ears. You can just keep it simple and just do one solid color. Or if you want to add a little bit of a shadow, you can just take your brush and get a little extra of that yellow oxide, just so that it's a little bit darker. Just lightly brush that in. It's fairly subtle. I'll go in again and just make it a little more obvious so you can see a little more. Just adding a little bit of that yellow ochre just towards the bottom. You can also add shadows on the feet if you want to. But of course, if you want to just keep it simple, you can just do a solid color. Little brush strokes along the bottoms of the feet. So I'm going to now still continue with that yellow ochre or yellow oxide as my main base. I'm going to fill in the snout. I'm going to ignore the nose for now. In fact, because I'm going to paint that later. So again, just my white, my yellow oxide, mix, 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 mix. I'm still using that round 1/4 inch brush. Depending on how big that area is for you, you may still find that this brush works, but there's also the 1/8 inch round brush, which I'll use later. Trace this shape here. It's sort of triangular, kind of like an upside down triangle, but rounded on the corners. And realize the shape of this here, what I'm doing right now, is a little bit different than the original. It's a little bit smaller, but that's all right. As I said before, every time you do a painting, it's going to come out a little bit different. And that's the fun of art. You never quite know what you're going to get. Alright, so just do one coat here. I have my nice light color, and then I want to add a little bit of shadow to the bottom part. So I'm just going to go for that extra bit of the yellow oxide without white, although my brush is still dirty. Brush that in along the bottom here. Quick wipe on the brush. This is still wet. I'm just going to brush along that edge again, smooth it out. I'm going to get a little bit of white towards the top part here. So I'm just going in long, smooth brush strokes. Steadying my hand on that canvas, holding that brush like a pencil, close to that brush part, close to the bristles. Add a little extra white there. If you have a harsh edge, give your brush a quick wipe and then just brush along that edge again to smooth it out. Very lightly, pulling in the color towards the center. So now that I have that in there, I can go in and possibly fine-tune the little furs that are sort of coming out from the side of that mouth area. So I can use that same brush, or I could maybe switch to my smaller round brush. I have my 1/8 inch round brush. I'm just going to tap in a little bit of that burnt umber, that really dark color, just along the edge here. On the edge of this mouth area, because that's where it's going to be more shadowy. You can even trace along there if you want to. Just trace right along the edge. And then just kind of tap in little bits of color. So we're starting to get to the more detailed area here. Getting a little more focused. So I'm just fine-tuning that. Okay, so sometimes you gotta switch between brushes here. Alright, I just want that shadowy bit of fur to kind of make that transition a little more gradual there. I'm tapping in my other colors a little bit. Alright, so we can let that hang out and move to the ears. So I just introduced the smaller round brush. This is my 1/8 inch round brush, and I'm going to use that to tap in little short brush strokes all around the ear. So just like I did the fur on the face and on the arms and the legs, you want to alternate between your 2 shades of brown, the burnt sienna, the burnt umber, and also a little bit of white. I'm just using a smaller brush. I'm still making short little brush strokes. I'm going to start from that ear and go out. Overlap that yellow part a bit and just go around. So I have a little burnt sienna, I've got a little bit of burnt umber. Let those colors overlap a bit. Alternate between those 2 browns and also pop in a little bit of white here and there. No need to clean the brush in between. You can give it a quick wipe if you need to, if there's too much paint on there, but these colors are gonna mix just a little bit on the canvas, so there's no need to clean the brush thoroughly. And while you're working on filling in that part of the ear, you can also go in and fine-tune that little area where the ear and the top of the head meet. If it looks like it's a sudden change or like the top of the head is sort of cut off, you can go back, and just like we did with the feet, we can go back in and just add in some extra little brush strokes from the head, overlapping that part of the ear. You can use either round brush for that. I could still fill this in a little bit more, fine-tune it, right? You can always make those adjustments. I'm going to move on to the other ear so you can see that demo again. So I have my small round brush, the 1/8 inch round brush. I got a little bit of burnt sienna on there, and I'm just making short little brush strokes from that outer edge that I painted on the ear, and I'm going out. Just tapping in little short brush strokes. Just like I did on the face, except these brush strokes are a little smaller. So alternating between my burnt sienna, my burnt umber. I'm going to get a little bit of white in there as well. Letting those colors overlap in some spots. They may blend a little bit more in other spots. One color may stand out a bit more. Getting to fill in the top of the head here a little bit more now. So I'm just going to go back and fill in the fur from the head, but have it overlap the ear a bit. So at this stage, you may find that your bear looks sort of like a bear, but also maybe kind of like a demonic Furby or some other thing. That's fun to sort of see different shapes that our paintings take on. So I want to know, if your painting doesn't look like a teddy bear at this point, leave a comment. Let me know what it reminds you of. Alright, so let's give this bear a face. We want to do the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. So I want to get a little bit more bright red on my palette, because I need a little bit of red for the eyes and the nose. They're brown, but they're sort of a pinkish brown. So I'm going to get a little bit of bright red. I only need a teensy little bit, really. I'm going to get my little brush, that's my 1/8 inch round brush. I'm going to start with white. I'm going to get a couple scoops of white, maybe 2 scoops of white here. And just a little tiny touch of red. I'm going to mix that in. It's going to make a nice light pale red color. We want it to be more muted, a little bit more of a brownish color. So I'm going to pick up a scoop of my burnt sienna. So that's the more reddish brown color. I'm going to mix that in there. And it's going to tone down that pink color If it still looks very pink, you can take a scoop of what you have mixed already, put that aside and get a little more burnt sienna. Mix, 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 mix. And there we go. I think it's a somewhat different shade than what I originally had, but I like it. It's like this muted sort of pinkish brown. Everyone's going to have their own shade of brown. If you don't like it, you can always remix it. And I have a lot of paint here on this little brush, so I just want to kind of roll it and wipe it, kind of pull it across my palette here. Get the excess off, and I'm going to use this to paint in my eyes and my nose. So I'm going to hold my brush like a pencil, or that metal part, steady my hand on the canvas, and I'm going to trace these circles that I have here for the eyes. Okay, and then just fill that in. And while you're painting the eyes and the nose, if you're like, oh, that color doesn't look quite right, you can always remix. Just let whatever you have on the canvas already dry, and then you could do another coat in your new color. Because sometimes when you mix on the palette, you're like, oh, that's perfect. And then you go to put it on your canvas, like, oh, what happened? So if that happens, don't panic, don't worry, it's not a mistake. You can always adjust it. You can always paint over it, or maybe turn it into something new. There we go. I think those are two different eye colors here, so I'm going to paint over this one. Alright, so we want to let those dry before we add the black centers. Also, I'm going to fine tune the little bits of fur that are like right along the edge of the eye, just like we did with this mouth area, but I'm going to let those dry first, and I'm going to paint the nose. I'm going to do the nose the same color that I have for the eyes, but maybe just with a teeny bit more of that burnt sienna, make it a little bit more brown. So you can use the same color if you like it, or you can add a little more brown and use that for the nose. Just take your brush, wipe some of the excess off, hold it like a pencil, steady yourself, and we're doing an upside down triangular shape with rounded corners. So I'm making the nose up towards the top here, leaving space for the mouth underneath, and that's going to get filled in. 1/8 inch round brush. And we don't want it to be flat. We want to add a little shadow and highlight. So while it's still a little bit wet, and I still have some of this paint color on my brush, I'm going to pick up a little bit of that burnt sienna. So I have a darker shade on my brush. I'm just going to brush along the bottom part of the nose, just like we did with this little like snout area, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to add a little shadow along the bottom, just tracing along that bottom part on either side. And then giving my brush a quick wipe, and then just going over that edge again to kind of smooth it out. And then I'm going to go for a little bit of white with my dirty brush, and I'm going to add a little highlight on the top part of the nose. You can wipe off your brush after that and just go over it again. Smooth it out a bit. Make that nose even more defined. You could always take your skinny brush, just the very tip of that 1/8 inch round brush with that burnt sienna, and just trace along just the very edge along the bottom part. And I want to make that highlight a little more prominent, so I'm going to add a little more white here on the top. So there's my nose. I'm going to do the mouth. He's got a cute little mouth. Think like a U, but kind of stretched out, like it's a really wide U. So I have my skinny 1/8 inch round brush. I'm going to go into my burnt sienna. You can use burnt sienna or the burnt umber, whichever you prefer. And don't just dunk and then draw. You want to dip it in And then press down on your palette, roll that brush, and pull, so that you bring that to a point and you've taken off some of the excess. And I'm just going to draw a little U shape underneath that nose. I'm steadying my hand on the canvas. There we go, and it's slightly off center, but that's alright because that's kind of cute. And actually the bear I used as reference has a somewhat off center mouth anyway, so I think it adds character. Alright, so while I have that burnt sienna on there and the eyes are probably dry at this point, I'm just going to go back in and very carefully trace around the outside of those circles with my burnt sienna. Maybe go for burnt umber even. And just very gently trace and tap in that brown around the eyes so we don't have any like weird looking gaps between the eyes and the fur. So just like we did around here on this mouth area, trace along that outer edge, tapping a few little brush strokes in there if you need to, just kind of fill that in a little better. Wipe off the excess, hold that brush like a pencil, steady yourself on that canvas. Just take your hand and just plaster it to the canvas. It's dry now, so you can just steady yourself as you go. So now we just need to add some pupils. So this is where we're going to use our black paint. So I'm going to use my skinny brush. Black paint a little bit can go a long way, and we're also using that on a small area. So I'm just going to take a little bit on my little plate here. And we're going to use our little brush. We're just going to wet it, dry it, get a little bit of that black paint, and do my little swirl and scrape across my plate to bring that to a point. Take off the excess, hold that brush like a pencil, steady yourself on that canvas, and just draw a little circle in between either of those eyes. Okay, so you can make those pupils as big or small as you like. And then you want to fill that in. And you'll see I have my hand steadied on my canvas. Do the same for the other eye. Try to make them the same size. I know that's kind of tricky, but do what you can. You can always make adjustments, so if one is like wildly smaller than the other, you can always make it bigger to better match the other one. Or you can leave it and just be like, you know what, my bear's got character. I'm leaving it. Alright, so this bear also has a little sparkle of light on each eye, but we're not going to do that yet because we want to make sure that that black is completely dry before we add that little pop of white. So at this point, you can always go back, you can, add in more little bits of fur and fill in the face a little bit better, add some highlights where you need to. You can always go back to do that, but we have this card. So I'm going to go for my 1/2 inch bright brush, it's a small square brush. I'm going to use some white paint, and we're going to draw on the card. So I'm going to dip in my white and wipe off some of that excess so that we have a nice, crisp, thin edge here. And that's the part of the brush that I'm going to use to draw the outline of the card. So I'm just going to trace along here, and I'm holding the brush so that it's that flat edge that's hitting the canvas, so it's sticking out. So it's not flat like that, it's sticking out. I'm using the edge, that top edge of that brush. Alright, and then the top of the card, it kind of curves up a little bit. That's going to come down. So we want to make sure that it looks like this card is opened, right? So from this corner here, closer to the ear, going down, I'm going to curve my card just a little bit in the other direction. And on this version, the card's getting a little cut off on the edge of the canvas, but that's all right. And then line straight down. And now it's okay if I crisp up that edge here where the fur is and kind of cut it off, because the card is meant to be in front of his foot. And there we go. So once that's in there, you can just take your brush, that little square 1/2 inch bright brush, and just fill in. So now you can make that brush flat and just fill that in. Give that brush a little dip in the water, dab on the paper towel if you need to, and just fill that in. And I know I just brushed right over that line that I drew before, but I can still kind of see where it is. I got a sense of how the card is opening, which I need for when I do my black outline after this white is dried. Okay, and this paw is meant to be in front of the card here, so if you end up with a little bit of a gap there, or the white kind of cuts off the fur, you can go back and add some little fur to the paw and have it overlap the card a bit. And if that white's a little see-through, you could always add another coat. Alright, so I did some shorter little brush strokes, but then if you want to smooth it out, just long, smooth, continuous brush strokes all the way across. There we go. Okay, so we gotta let that dry before we do the black outline and the little decoration on the card. I think my eyes are dry. Yes, so the eyes are dry. So if your eyes are dry, you can add that little pop of highlight. So that's with white paint, but I'm going to put that square brush down and go for my little skinny brush again, the little skinny round one. And instead of using the bristle end, I'm going to use the handle. I'm going to dip the handle in the white paint, and I'm just going to dot on that little bit of a highlight. So I'm just going to, take a little excess off there. So I got the handle of the brush. I'm just going to find a spot where I want that highlight to be. I like to do it towards the top right and just press down and then pull away. And wherever you do it on one eye, you want to do it on the other eye. It may not be in the exact same position, but you want it fairly close so it doesn't look like your bear is cross-eyed. So I did it on the top right here, so I'm going to move to the top right on the other eye, press down right in that spot where the pupil meets the iris, and then pull straight away. And now he's got a little bit of life in his eyes. I just kind of want to touch up his nose a little bit. I feel like he needs another highlight on his nose. There we go. There we go. If you did your card and you see little gaps between the card and the body of the bear, or maybe the paw, that's where you can go back in and just fine-tune those edges like we did around the mouth and around the eyes. Extend some of those brush strokes back to that big round brush, the 1/4 inch. Fine-tune all the edges. While we're working on this, that white is drying. And we really just have a few steps left. Gotta outline the card, gotta add the heart, and our little to you from me note. Here, this is a good spot to either take a break, put your brush down, stretch, get a refill on your drink, whatever you need to do, or maybe you're just like, oh, let me just find little tiny spots where I need to, just tap in a little more paint, make those tiny little adjustments. Maybe this is the part where you want to think about what you want to put on your card. Maybe you want to customize it. You know, I put the heart because it's meant to be a Valentine's Day card. So if you're doing Valentine's, you can still do the heart, or maybe you can do 2 hearts or heart with the arrow. I also wrote to you from me just to keep it sort of cute and also generic. Maybe you want to give this as a gift to someone, so you want to put their names on it and your name on the bottom. So maybe think about like what you want to put on your card if you're going to switch it up a little bit from the original. Once that's done, and the card is ready, you can go back to your skinny brush. I call this my skinny brush. This is my 1/8 inch round. And I'm going to go for my black paint. And this is where you want long, smooth, continuous brush strokes. You don't want to stop and start and stop and start and stop and start while you're tracing. You want long, smooth brush strokes so that you have a nice, crisp edge there. If you need to, you can get just a tiny drop of water in that black paint. You don't want it dripping everywhere, but sometimes you need to kind of loosen up the paint so it flows easy, especially if you're doing line work. And then you want to roll and wipe off the excess, bring that brush to a point, hold that brush like a pencil, steady yourself on the canvas. If that card is in a weird spot for you where you can't really rest your hand, just flip that canvas. You can always rotate it. You can even turn it upside down if you need to. And we're just tracing along the outline of this card. Not pressing too hard. If I kind of run out of paint as I go, I'm just still going to continue on. So I have one smooth brush stroke, and then I'm going to get a little more paint and go over it again. Okay, so if you're kind of heavy-handed with your brush strokes and you have a thicker brush stroke, that's okay. Maybe it's a style choice, but keep in mind the more you press down with that brush, the thicker that line is going to be. So if you want it to be thinner, then you want to just go very, very lightly. Just sort of graze the canvas. Press down more firmly if you want a thicker line. So there's that. And then for the top of the card, it's opened. So I want to trace along this curved bit here. And then stop before I get to this corner here. Come down just a bit. And then I want to draw the front part of the card. So I'm going to start from this corner over in this corner that's closer to Benny's ear as I go down towards the edge of my canvas. Okay, and if the card's cut off by the edge of the canvas like mine is, it's alright. Sometimes you just got to kind of go with the flow. Alright, so now I want to trace this bottom edge and then this edge here. So you can go left, right, right, left, whichever is easier for you. There we go. Alright. Trace over that a couple times. Alright, so now the bottom. Being careful not to rest my hand on any wet black paint. There we go. There's our card. So we can write to you from me, or to your Valentine's Day, Valentine's name, from your name, however you want to customize it. You can even do a different design altogether. I'm going to stick to what I have just to keep things simple. And if you want to, before you commit to actually writing in paint, take a pencil and just very lightly write in your message, leaving room for the heart, or maybe even draw the heart. Just very lightly sketch in what you want on your card. While you're working with pencil, and you can go very lightly and still erase and paint over. To you from me. Okay, so if you want to write that out with a pencil before you commit, you can. And I'm going to start with my writing because I'm already into my line work with my skinny brush and my black paint. Okay, and we're gonna write out these words. If that's a little intimidating for you, you can use a Sharpie, just a black Sharpie, but get one of those like super fine tipped ones, not a thick one, like a really fine tipped black marker. You can use that to write on here. Just make sure this is dry first. If you wanna give it a try with your paintbrush, you certainly can. I'm going to steady my hand on the canvas as I grip my brush like I would a pencil. I'm just going to trace along my words. And I just printed it out too, so that's going to make it a little bit easier than trying to do it in script if you're new to writing with paint. And for those curved letters, you can go halfway and then curve around the other way. And now that we are nearing the end of our painting, perhaps you want to leave a comment below and let me know what is your favorite part of this painting. Maybe it's your favorite part of the process, favorite part that you painted, or maybe something that you just liked from the original. So what's your favorite part? I think mine is the mouth. Once I get the face done, I just think he's so cute. Alright, got the message on there, so now I'm just going to rinse off my brush, and I want to rinse it off really well, so I'm going to then go into red paint to make my heart. And you can make that heart pink too if you like. If you want a pink heart instead of a red heart, you certainly can switch it up. Alright, just make sure you get all that black paint out of there. Really like squeeze it between your paper towels. Sometimes that paint water likes to hang out at the base of those bristles there. I rinsed out my brush really well. I'm going for that red paint. And since we're going to trace the outline first, we want to be a little more delicate. So not too much paint on that brush. You want to wipe and roll off some of that excess. Bring that brush to a point. Steady yourself if you need to. And I'm just going to start by tracing that heart that I drew before. If that paint is not really moving across, maybe it's kind of thick, you're not getting it, it doesn't feel like it's sliding, you can just add a tiny drop of water to that paint. And so depending on the size of your heart, you may want to continue filling in that heart with that skinny brush, or maybe you want to move to the larger of the two round brushes. So 1/4 inch round brush to fill in, being very careful starting around the edge here, setting my hand on the canvas, gripping that brush like a pencil, close to the bristles. Holding that brush like really far back, that brush is going to wobble all over the place. So when you get into more detailed work, you want to grip that brush close to those bristles so you have more control over what you're doing. So if you stuck with me through this whole painting, congratulations, and thank you for hanging out with me. Alright, so that heart is the final detail based on our reference photo, but of course there is one more step. The final step in any painting is sign your name. Take credit for your work. You can use your skinny brush in whichever color you like, although I'd recommend using something that stands out against the background. Sign or initial your name, or you can use a Sharpie on the side or the back of your canvas. That works as well, but make sure you're finished first. So take a step back, see if you want to add any other little details. Maybe if you have extra space on the side or the top, you can add a balloon, flowers, a little message across the top, whatever you like. It is your painting. I would love to see your versions of these, so please feel free. If you're on Instagram, tag me at tinyartwork. Remember, underscore between tiny and art and work. Link is down in the description. I would love to see these, and definitely give yourself a round of applause, a little pat on the back for a job well done. I hope you come back for more, and until then, happy painting.